What's good, folks? Family, friends, loved ones, enemies, frenemies, wizards, witches, muggles, mudbloods, people of Middle Earth to another episode of Disguise Coverage, the only podcast in existence that gives you an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin. I'm your host, Anthony Prohaska. Find me on Twitter at pro__ant. That's pro 2_ANT. The show, of course, is sponsored by One Pie Pizza, the best pizza in Buffalo, New York. Hands down, official stamp of approval, delicious sweet sauce pie. They do a bunch of good for the community with all their different initiatives and drives. We'll talk about them later in the show when I plug the sponsor further. Aside from this opening plug, in tonight's episode, we're going to dive into the Buffalo Bills roster. Good timing here from Calgary Mafia. Just slightly off. He said, if I drop a like, will you start right now? You're very close. Oh, see? And I see the smirk. You're very close. What's up, John? Thank you for rolling. Thank you for joining me tonight on this episode, John. And in this episode of Disguise Coverage tonight, as it is titled Buffalo Bills Roster Reset, Biggest Questions, Needs, and More, we are 9 days away from the NFL Draft. Next Thursday, the 27th of April, this channel, Cover One, the channel, we will be live with night one of the draft, and then we'll have coverage on night two, coverage on day three, all of these things, because the NFL draft will be live next week, starting Thursday, April 27th. And we've been very draft focused here on this show, going back to, well, really once the Bills got eliminated and we kind of wrapped up the season in terms of what the Bills versus Bengals was, what the season was for the Bills this past year and what it meant going forward. After we kind of did some housekeeping with the current roster at that point, everything was really forward focused: free agency, targets, fits, schematics, coaching announcements, draft strategy, draft prospects, all of these pieces. And now that we're a week away, I wanted to kind of reset the table a little bit by resetting the discussion in regards to the Buffalo Bills roster. So in tonight's episode, we are going to go position group by position group. Some will require a deeper dive than others, but we're going to go position group by position group for this Buffalo Bills team and really take a look at everything in terms of, proper scope, position by position, to really see what the Bills look like, not only for 2023, but for 2024, in terms of looking at what each of these positions offer from a quality standpoint, from a depth standpoint, from a contract standpoint, in order to kind of put some focus into, again, what this team needs to focus on as the offseason continues, but also how that might potentially impact 2024. Again, the draft, 9 days away. There will be new additions to this Buffalo Bills team in a variety of ways, but I thought it would be important to kind of reset things, take a step back, take a breath, look at the roster for what it is, and dive into players, position groups, needs, questions at every single position group in terms of, what are some underlying questions? What are some minor questions? What are the biggest and most important questions? There's legitimately a lot to answer for this team, as we've talked about all offseason. This offseason I thought was a pivotal one for the Bills. I thought this draft was a pivotal one for the Bills, and it wasn't just because of what 2023 offers or what 2023 has in terms of needs for this team, but a lot of it ties into what 2024 holds and beyond. So that's the focus of tonight's episode. As you folks know, what we like to do here on the show: any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, philosophies, ideologies, maxims, whatever have you, please drop them into the chat as we go position group by position group. I see some questions already coming in. I will answer them before we dive into the meat and crux of this episode. But any thoughts that are going through your head, I'm going to mention it now, and I'll mention it once we really dive into each topic as well. What are your thoughts for each position group? Which position group is, of the biggest concern to you? What do you think the biggest question is for this roster as a whole? What do you think the biggest question is at each position group? As I bring up the headers and change the topic, feel free to flood the chat. Let me know, where's your head at? What are you focused on, both within this team and potentially into the draft next week? Thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, all of those pieces and all of those things. Let's grab this question first from Anthony. Terrific name. Absolutely fantastic name. Love it. Anthony says, do you think the AJ Klein signing will mean we draft a linebacker later than day 2? I hope not. I don't think so. I don't think, and I don't mean this to be disrespectful to AJ Klein, I don't think the AJ Klein move necessarily tips the scales tremendously in one direction or the other. I think This was a depth move. This was a leadership move. This is a guy who adds some salt and some sandpaper to your lineup, some tenacity, some violence. Got plenty of experience with Sean McDermott. He's a veteran in this league. And I think you need another veteran presence and somebody who's seen real snaps in the NFL aside from Matt Milano. I don't know if Milano's the most vocal guy or not, but I think adding another quality mind to the linebacker room is a big piece for this one. And it's somebody with Klein, who can step in a pinch and provide you some snaps. But I don't necessarily think now this is a part of a bigger conversation that we've had on this show a bunch. There could be schematic changes for the Buffalo Bills defensively in terms of coverages they play, in terms of what they ask from the linebacker role, in terms of the fronts that they use and the overall mindset and philosophy they use, depending on how much they lean into what Sean McDermott was as a defensive coordinator with the Carolina Panthers. So potentially, I guess there is a world where AJ Klein is your first and second down linebacker, and then you're bringing in Taylor Rapp to be your dime linebacker on third downs. You're trying to get creative. I don't necessarily love that because I think if you have a siloed role like that, such as, a first and second down linebacker only, kind of, shoehorns you into certain areas and can allow you to be dictated to by an opponent. So I don't love that too much, but I guess it's on the table. But in my heart of hearts right now, no, I don't think the Klein signing means too much towards the draft. I think if the Bills thought that, I'm just making this up, if the Bills thought that Jack Campbell was the top priority in round one, last week, I still think they think that right now with AJ Klein. Maybe it swings the tables a little bit and they think, if the value is really tremendously great at that spot for another person who fell, maybe they feel more comfortable leaning into that because they do have the safety net somewhat of AJ Klein. But I think that would be present regardless of if AJ Klein was there or not. And I don't think it sways anything too much. Oof. Thank you very much, NFL Draft Fanatics. Constant viewer and appearer here on the show, always in the chat. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for the super chat. I sincerely appreciate it. That's awesome. Thank you. Statement is, tell us the 5th and 6th round position groups which can make the roster. I would look there, then work backwards to round 1 for the player position targets. Ooh, very interesting. So if we're looking at this from a draft perspective, in terms of 5th and 6th round position groups, ooh, I think those ones, I think you're kind of, I don't want to say bottom of the barrel, but I think you're looking for more positions that are in flux and don't necessarily have firmly entrenched roles. So 5th and 6th round position groups that I think could make the roster: running back potentially. Maybe if they really like somebody in the draft who falls to the 5th or 6th round, I think there's some potential there. Tight end potentially, just because your third tight end on the roster is Zach Davidson, and no disrespect, I don't think he has a spot sewn up. I think defensive tackle, even potentially your 5th and 6th defensive tackles on the roster are Ilianku and Brandon Bryant. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that a 5th or a 6th round defensive tackle could come in and usurp one of them and move up into that 5th spot, or potentially climb up into the 4th spot, depending on the health or status of Jordan Phillips. I also think, there's an outside shot at wide receiver as well. Khalil Shakir was a 5th rounder in last year's draft. I think there's always receiver value at some point in the draft, depending on what you're looking for. And I think the meat of the strength of this receiver class is in the 2nd and 3rd and into the 4th rounds. And I think some dudes will fall to the 5th. So I think you could find 5th and 6th round talent at those positions I mentioned. I also think you could find safety talent too. Not that I think the Bills necessarily need it now, especially with Hamlin announcing that he is potentially coming back. But those are the positions I would look to. Outside shot at edge, but I don't think there's going to be a decent amount of edges that would last into the 5th and 6th that are necessarily going to crack the roster. That's where I'm at right now. That was a good question, though. That I was not prepared for that at all. So I'm kind of just thinking off the top of my head. So it's a very fair question. And you say that you're laughing because you think similarly. Well, great minds, as they say. Good question. Got me thinking a little bit. Let's go to some other questions. Roy says, what position is most needed according to the tree? Well, the tree is looking as beautiful as ever, still dressed in its Easter pastels. We'll be switching up the garland for next week because it is, draft miss, and that is a special, special time and occasion, which the tree recognizes. The tree and I think very similarly in terms of what position is needed most. And I think right now, depending on what you're looking at, I think the tree is leaning towards the trenches. both in terms of the offense and defense, offensive tackle and defensive tackle and edge. I think that's where the tree is looking. I got to stop because we got another super chat. Thank you very much, Justin, for being here, and thank you very much for the monetary donation and the super chat. Sincerely appreciate it. That's awesome. Justin says, wide receiver, tight end 2, defensive tackle, middle linebacker, edge, right tackle. I am team trade down. What say you? I would love the opportunity to trade down if I were the Buffalo Bills. I don't like to predict it or necessarily forecast it because there are so many variables. You need a team and a partner to dance with. You also need enough players that you like to potentially be there. If you have a handful of guys, you're comfortable trading back because you're like, you know what, we'll take any of these guys right now. So as long as one of them falls, cool, we'll trade back. But then what happens if the board falls a certain way and that reduces the opportunity for you to trade with a partner? I mean, we saw it from the opposite perspective when the Bills traded for Josh Allen. They had that trade lined up with the Broncos. And Elway told Bean, like, hey, yeah, we'll do that trade. But if we have a guy if he drops, we're going to make that pick and use it on that guy. Lo and behold, that guy was Bradley Chubb. Chubb fell. Broncos made that pick. Trade fell apart. Still worked out for the Bills. But a lot of variables when it comes to the trade down piece. But I would love that. Ideally, I would like the Bills if they could trade down into the mid 30s or the late 30s, get yourself an extra day 2 pick. In an ideal world, I would love to amass as much draft capital on day 2 this year. Day 2 is rounds 2 and 3. I think that's where the best value for this draft class is. I think picks 25-ish through 55-ish, 60-ish is where the most value is going to be. So I would love to amass as many picks as possible, even early day 3 picks like a round 4. I would like to amass that capital, depending again on how the board falls. But with the way I think the board is going to fall, one of those positions, those positions you mentioned, I legitimately think from wide receiver, defensive tackle, linebacker, edge, and right tackle, someone legitimate is going to fall to 27. With how many quarterbacks I think go before pick 27, with how many tight ends I think go before pick 27, some of the other given edge rushers and defensive tackle prospects, I think someone legitimate is going to fall to 27, which will obviously influence my trade down philosophy and strategy going into this draft. But just off of the general value, the way the strength of this draft class is and where the weaknesses are, I would favor a trade down. I think that's a very fair question. Well done, well done, well done. Bum, 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 bum. What do we got here? John says, Mazi Smith is really starting to grow on me as our pick at 27. I really love Mazi Smith. I like what he adds from a defensive tackle standpoint. His ability to play low. He's physical and powerful versus the run. He can torque offensive linemen almost like he's an offensive lineman. He can operate in a center shade, a 1-tech, even some 3-tech, 4-eye, straight up on the nose is a 0. Or straight up on the center as a 0. He's not going to give you a bunch in terms of pass rush, but he's got that high motor. He wins with power and extension. And I think, as a team that is probably going to continue to use light boxes and nickel personnel on defense, I want to beef up that interior. I want to be stronger in the spine of my defense. And that spine, your defensive tackles, your linebackers, up to your safeties. And especially with, we're going to talk about as this episode goes on, but we've mentioned here on the show before, the Bills don't have any defensive tackles signed for next season. There are some void years in terms of cap hits, but there is physically no player that is signed at defensive tackle for 2024 as of right now. Everybody who's on the roster for 2023 is no longer on the roster come 2024 as of right now. So I'm not against the idea of Mazi Smith. I really, 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 really like him a lot. A lot of thoughts coming through for protect our quarterback. Tim says, random thought, McDermott takes a Jedi defense and gets Sith nasty in 2023. I'm here for it. Yes, nerd alert. That was very good. Elvis says the AJ Klein signing makes me feel much better. Richard says this wide receiver class is below average. Better get Hopkins or the Bills may end up being third in the AFC East. I do think I don't love this wide receiver class. As I stated last week on the show, I think the value is more for second and third round for the wide receiver class than I do first round. The only receiver that I have a true first round grade on in this draft is Jackson Smith and Jigba, but I would be comfortable taking Jax or Zay Flowers or Jordan Addison in the first round. Some other guys I'm a little more wishy-washy on, but I think there is way more value in rounds 2, 3, and 4. And again, as I stated last week, and I've said on Twitter, Jackson Smith-Njigba, like even if he's your number one receiver, whoever your number one receiver is in this year's class, for me, at best, they're wide receiver 6 in last year's class, which was a very good class. Not that that makes them any worse, but you have to think of it from the perspective of somebody who might be good in their individual class. Once they get drafted, they're getting put into the big pool of the NFL. And depending on where they fall, again, value. Roy says, after watching all the different Bills shows and listening to multiple opinions from experts, I still have no idea who Beane will take in round 1, 2, or 3. And that's how he wants it. He wants smokescreen season. He wants you to not know what he's doing. He doesn't want to tip his hand for himself or the organization. I think it's very smart. Ooh, Spin says, our needs, right tackle, middle linebacker, defensive end, defensive tackle, and center to learn behind Morse and replace in the future, wide receiver for the boundary, and tight end for blocking. We're going to get into a bunch of those pieces. Spin, I'm like, where your head's at. Ooh, CR says, love your Christmas trees in the background. Yes, there is 2. There's this Easter one, and then there's this little Easter beauty. I'm so horrible at pointing this stuff on camera. Well done, CR. I appreciate your appreciation for the tree. Also, my wife does the background, so she will appreciate that as well. Ooh, Josh says Siaki Ika, defensive tackle from Baylor, feels like he's going to be a Bill. His power seems different than most of the defensive tackles in this group. Justin, again, super chat. Thank you so much, man. Justin says, I think Beane loves the 5th-year option, so I think he will stay at 27, but he might trade down on day 2. So that's a fair point, right? If you get taken in the first round, for those who don't know, you have the 4-year contract, but then the team has the option to pick up your 5th year. That does not exist if you are taken after the first round. So if you take somebody in the first round, you have that option to potentially have them under pretty good cost control for 5 years. And that's a very fair point. So that's very fair. Bill says, any thought on next year's wide receiver class? Where would JSN be? I'll be honest with you, Bill. I haven't even started to go down that rabbit hole yet. That's like a July, August task as I kind of put together pieces for the upcoming college football season and kind of do preseason rankings for myself to kind of formulate my structure for everything. But that's a good question, but I got no ideas at this point, but I appreciate you. David says, is Ant doing the show by himself this week? And I love the answer from Spin. Spin says he usually does the show by himself every week. That's right. Sometimes I work in guests. Sometimes I do them solo. This is mainly just, my solo show, but I work in different people. Depends on what's going on. Oh, look at I like all the kind words. Tim says sometimes he does the show solo, plays the drums, and files our taxes. He is a treasure. Thank you, Tim. I appreciate it. I can't even make a joke. That was very good. Oh, appreciate. Damn, I just got what Bill meant. I'm taking that comment down. Appreciate you. All right. I appreciate all the kind words coming through. I don't like to pull up too many. I say it to the outro all the time. I feel corny pulling up a lot of kind things for myself, but I like where your heads are at, except for you, Bill, with that last comment, but well played. You got me. So let's dive into the Buffalo Bills roster reset, biggest questions, needs, and more. We're going to dive into things just from a depth chart order perspective, as I normally have it in my head whenever I go through depth charts. And as I mentioned before, as we go through each position group, questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, put them into the chat. Biggest question or concern for that position group, put it into the chat. General thoughts, whatever you got, throw it up into the chat. I will pull up as many comments as physically possible as I read off my notes and go through here. As I state all the time and have done already on the show, super chats are a guaranteed pull up comment, whether it's a comment, question, or anything you got. Automatic pull up because 1, I respect the monetary donation. 2, I see the color and it attracts my eyes and it pulls me away from my notes. So as we dive into this crux main event of the episode, we're going to start with the quarterback group, which I don't think we're going to spend a ton of time here, but we're looking at this group. It's Josh Allen, Kyle Allen, and Matt Barkley as of now. For some reason, my notes say Matt Barkley, and I don't know why, but those are the 3 right now. From a high-level perspective, this group goes as Josh Allen goes. We saw the elbow injury that he had last year. I don't even want to put this out into the ether, but I don't know what it would even take to get Josh Allen out of the lineup. Like that elbow injury, he probably should have sat for at least 1 or 2 weeks and kind of rested a little bit. We saw him affected really, for the first 2 or 3 weeks, I thought from a mechanical perspective in terms of how it altered his release and his success, especially going to his left and especially in the intermediate part of the field, physically and mechanically. I thought it also impacted some of his decision making. And you had a capable backup in Case Keenum, but the Bills didn't go to Keenum then. I really don't know what it would take for Josh Allen to be out of the lineup. I think he would have to be missing a limb. And so if you're looking at this group as it stands right now, again, this group goes as Josh Allen goes. The Bills brought in Kyle Allen to be the main backup for Josh Allen this year. Kyle Allen is a friend of Josh Allen, as is Matt Barkley. So next year, when Kyle Allen is a unrestricted free agent, we will see if we continue the string of one-year backup quarterbacks and or friends of Josh Allen, or maybe the Bills bring a quarterback in late in the draft, which I kind of doubt, or potentially an undrafted free agent. My biggest question here for this position group is, as it is going to kind of be every year, what do you want in a backup to Josh Allen? Do you want more of the Case Keenum mold, the savvy vet who is good in the QB room and or on the sideline and is kind of like an extension of the coaching staff and can help Josh Allen mentally and can be that guy who, can help game manage if he has to go into the game, the guy who will just keep you on track, won't lose the game for you, but isn't going to go and win. And again, his real value is in the film room, in the QB room during the week in terms of identifying coverages and putting game plans together, helping you on the Microsoft Surface tablet on the sideline and kind of breaking things down, that extension of the coaching staff piece. Or again, if he's thrust into game action, can manage things, keep you on track, kind of like what Chad Henne has been to Patrick Mahomes with the Kansas City Chiefs. So do the Bills stay in that direction kind of year after year, or do they opt to go with someone who's a more designed fit to Josh Allen? Do you go the route of having a backup who is more similar in skill set to your starting quarterback, a la what the Baltimore Ravens have done or did with Tyler Huntley to Lamar Jackson? That is the biggest question for me when it comes to the quarterback grouping. I don't think there's too much mystery. I don't think there's anything that really has to kind of kick this position group into the forefront in terms of conversation. It's Josh Allen and then everything else. If anything happens to Josh Allen, this team is in dire straits. Status of this group as a whole. But I do think it's interesting to wonder what the backup looks like going forward. Is it every year just a new guy, 1 year guy, Mitch Trubisky, Case Keenum? This year it's Kyle Allen. Do they keep cycling through? Are they looking? I'm not even making a joke. Like, is Josh Allen just literally asking them to bring in his boys for whatever reason, and that's what they're opting with? Are they looking for a certain mindset? Are they looking for a certain skill set? Or do they want to lean into, hey, do we want to get more of a mobile guy to try and build off of what Allen does, or do we just want to keep it with a vet? I think that's the biggest question for the quarterback grouping right now as we look at the roster as it's constructed. Again, Josh Allen, Kyle Allen, Matt Barkley. Kyle Allen is an unrestricted free agent next year. Barkley is what he is. So at this point next year, we may be having this exact same conversation in terms of who is the backup and what that looks like. Oh, question here from Spin. Spin says, would you be opposed to drafting Darnell Wright or DeJuan Jones in the first round? Second round, O'Cyrus Torrence. Round 3, Whippler. I know it's not realistic. Maybe they can trade up in the second. If your question is, would I want to do all of those in the first 3 rounds? I don't think I'd go that heavy O-line. But if I'm looking at them individually in a vacuum, I would not be opposed to drafting Darnell Wright in the first round. He is still my dream fall at 27. I think he comes in and beats out Spencer Brown for right tackle. He's an athletic grizzly bear who still got technique and got a good ceiling. He represents a high floor, powerful in the run game, but athletic and still technical enough in the pass game. And I think he will get better the more snaps that he gets at right tackle. So I would love for Darnell Wright to fall. DeJuan Jones, I like. I don't know if I'd want to take him in the first. I do have some questions about DeJuan Jones again, the dude is what? Let me go to my notes here. 6 foot 8, 350 pounds. He's strong. He's powerful. His hand placement is fine. Once he gets his paws on you, it's really tough to kind of go anywhere. I do wonder at the NFL level if he's going to be vulnerable and susceptible to inside moves, and if he can consistently anchor, and if he has the feet and the balance for that. And a lot of that is just tied to He's huge. He's 6'8", 350 pounds, which sounds awesome because he's a mountain of a man. And when he, washes down, he caves in the entire right side of the line, and it's impressive as hell, right? And when he does a snatch and trap and he chops you on the wrist, guys face plant and fall in the dirt. But I do wonder, will mobility be an issue just because of his size? He is huge. Being 6'8", 350 pounds, it doesn't really lend itself to you being an extremely mobile or athletic guy. So will mobility be an issue? If you put him on an island in wide alignments, how will he hold up consistently in the NFL? So I do like DeJuan Jones. I would target him more in the second round, ideally. I don't think he makes it to the Bills at 59. I think somebody bets on the traits and the size and the positives of him and kind of leans into those. I think he goes somewhere in the early to mid-second round. I do like O'Cyrus Torrence from Florida. I don't know how much he fits the scheme, though. I like that he's a physical people mover, road grader kind of guard, but he's more gap scheme than he is zone. And I think the Bills lean into more zone scheme this year. So we'll see. Luke Whippler, your round 3 option there, center from Ohio State. I really like Luke Whippler. Broken down a bunch of tape on him. I think that would be awesome to get a guy like him who can be waiting in the wings to take over for Mitch Morse when or if that day comes. I don't know if it's the best value given what else you could potentially get in the third round, but as a prospect, what you have in Luke Whippler, I think, is kind of like a mini Mitch Morse. Good movement in space, good mobility. He can pin and pull. He is more zone based, so that works if the Bills are going to lean into a zone run scheme with James Cook. Real technical. So I do like those options for the Bills. What else do we got? Anything? No. All right, let's move on to our next position group here, the running backs. So not to kind of gloss over QB, but I think that was kind of straightforward and easy in terms of what we're looking at. Running backs for the Buffalo Bills. You've got James Cook, Nyheim Hines, and Damian Harris. Nyheim Hines is a unrestricted free agent in 2025. He's got a minimal dead cap hit if he gets cut next year, pre or post June 1st. It's only a $500,000 dead cap hit. You'd save about $5 million. That's per the website Over the Cap. They are tremendous. Damian Harris is a UFA in 2024. If released this offseason, post June 1st, it's a $1 million dead cap hit and a savings of $770,000. So almost an even split. And then, of course, you got James Cook entering year 2, locked up for that 4-year contract starting from last year. So he's got this year plus another 2. That's what your running back group looks like as of right now. I don't think it's out of the question that Damian Harris doesn't make this roster, even though he's brought in and spoke at the press conference and he is a nice complimentary piece. I don't think it's out of the question that he somehow gets cut or doesn't make this roster, makes this team. But the biggest question for this group, I think, really comes down to what the timeshare and by extension, what the run game overall looks like. In 2021, as the season went on, we saw a gap scheme start to really take over for this Bills offense. More pin and pull, more powers, more counter, more Reggie Gilliam and 12 personnel or 21 personnel, depending on however you view Reggie Gilliam. That's how they closed out the 2021 season. We saw more physicality. We saw more of an attack-minded run game where they were running at opponents and kind of people moving. Devin Singletary saw the heavy line share of the snap rate and workload down the stretch. What we saw last year was more zone running mixed into this run game. As James Cook went in, we saw more zone. We saw more mid-zone, outside zone. That's not that he can't be a good gap scheme runner, but he is built for that zone work. He is built for that zone life, the way he can kind of press the line of scrimmage and flow like water through whatever hole comes available, similar to his brother, Dalvin Cook. I hate making that comp because I feel like it's low-hanging fruit and kind of weak, but he's a very good zone runner. The Bills leaned into that with him as the season went on last year. So is James Cook the number 1? How much does Nyheim Hines get worked in? How much of a factor is Damian Harris? Is the timeshare split? Is it a 1-2 like we've seen in the past several years? Like last year it was, Singletary and Cook. This year, is it Cook and Harris? Is it Cook and Hines? Is it Cook, Harris, and Hines? Is it mainly James Cook and the number 2 is whoever the hell they want? The timeshare piece is very interesting. And, I got to stop because we got a super chat. Thank you very much for being here, Morning Mind. I appreciate you. And thank you very much for the super chat. That's awesome to see. Thank you. Question is, what's your view on getting D Hop? I'd love to see him as a Bill and then on to the Super Bowl. Go Bills. Oof. I would be pretty happy if the Bills got DeAndre Hopkins. I still think he has the potential to be a number one wide receiver in the NFL. At the worst, he's a high-end wide receiver too. You put him with Stephon Diggs. Both of those guys have gravity. Both of those guys can beat man coverage. Both of those guys, and they also win in different ways. Hopkins plays real big at the catch point. He's good at contested catches. He's good at finding space. He's better with his yards after the catch, even though he's not a burner or the most elusive guy. I would gladly add him to the Buffalo Bills. I think it ticks a need for this team with wide receiver. It ticks that box. It checks that box. And I think all of a sudden you have one of the best wide receiver combinations in terms of a 1-2 wide receiver tandem in Stephon Diggs and DeAndre Hopkins. I would gladly take him. If the value was right in terms of what you have to trade and money and contract and how that all works out. But I think he would swing the pendulum heavily into the Bills' favor if they were to get DeAndre Hopkins. It would be a big move. So I would second that notion 1,000%. DF comes in and says, Ant, great to see you, bro. Appreciate you, DF, forever. And DF says, smack that like button like a woodpecker in heat. I think that's a fantastic simile there. And I think it's a good message. If you folks would be so kind, please drop a like on this video. It goes a long way towards helping myself and the entire team to track and trend in front of more eyes and ears. It significantly affects the algorithm. So if you'd be so kind, please, and thank you. If you're just coming in or you've been in here, please drop a like on this video. Even if you're watching later and you're not here live, that's cool. Please drop a like. It would be greatly appreciated. So, now here's the comment or question here from Aiden. So this ties into the next point, right? The timeshare question, I think, is the biggest question for this running back group. Is it mainly going to be Cook? Is it Cook and someone else? I think either way you slice it, Cook is going to get significant touches in this offense. It's just a matter of how much. Is it 50-50? Is it 60-40? Is it 70-30? Is it 70-15-15? I think he gets the lion's share or gets worked in to some degree for a significant level. It's just a matter of, is he the true one? Is it a 1-2? If it's a 1-2, is the 2 Hines or Harris? Or is it a 1-2-3? Or is it matchup dependent and matchup specific? Now, this ties into my next point. I don't think you can rule the Bills out drafting a running back in this draft, whether it's round 1 with Bijan Robinson or elsewhere. That then complicates this conversation even further, because if you draft a running back, they restructured Nyheim Hines. Hines isn't going to go anywhere. If they drafted a running back, that to me would signal that Damian Harris is likely going to be a cap casualty or cut. Again, like I mentioned, if released this offseason post June 1st, it's a $1 million dead cap hit and a savings of $770,000. So you're losing about $230,000, but it's not some number where it's like, well, we can't cut him. Like the dead cap is just astronomical. So Harris could be a guy who's cut. To answer this specific question, for Aiden says, who is our number one if Bijan falls and we take him? I really like James Cook. I liked him coming out of Georgia before the Bills got him. Myself and Eric Turner and Kendall Mursky broke him down in the Cover One film room. I like his skill set a lot. If Bijan falls and the Bills take him, Bijan Robinson is the one, and he gets the lion's share. If Bijan Robinson goes to the Buffalo Bills, he is the number one. I honestly think if Bijan Robinson goes to like any of the teams that are rumored to be interested in him, he's the number one. Bijan is elite. He is this is a draft that isn't full of top tier blue chip level prospect. There's only a handful, like depending on how you view it, really only like 4 to 7, depending on what you're looking at. Bijan is easily one of the blue chip prospects in this draft. Positional value is a whole nother conversation. If you don't think running backs are worth a first round pick, if you don't want to waste a 5th year option on a running back, that's a whole nother conversation. I understand that piece, but if we're just looking at it from a talent standpoint, from a player standpoint, Bijan Robinson is one of the best players in this draft. If Bijan Robinson gets drafted by the Buffalo Bills, he is the number one. No ifs, ands, or buts. That's it. Like, case closed. Usually I don't deal in absolutes like that, even though I am a fan of the Sith. Bijan, and again, I say this as a person who likes James Cook. I really like his skill set. I was happy with the pick last year. I'm excited to see what he can do with more workload and snap share this year. But if it's between him and Bijan, I think that's a cool pairing. You have a little bit of a different dynamic there in terms of what they can both offer. But Bijan can do everything. Like and as DF says here, he's a generational running back. He legitimately is. Like the conversation that is continuing to be had about Bijan Robinson is he like one of, you're trying to find drafts where he wouldn't have been the best running back in the draft. Like the conversation is really like, oh, who would have been the better prospect coming out? Was it Bijan Robinson or was it Saquon Barkley? Like Bijan is a stud. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He can run routes downfield or underneath. He's got power. He's got contact balance. He's got vision. He's got agility. He can make you miss in a phone booth. He still runs in the 4.4s. It's towards the higher end of the 4.4s, but he can still pull away and bust off a 75-yard touchdown run. He creates his own holes in his alleys. He doesn't need a runway or an offensive line to open things up for him. Bijan is absolutely tremendous. So if Bijan comes to the Buffalo Bills, then Aiden, to your point here, if Bijan falls and the Bills take him, Bijan is the hands down number one. Now, I don't think the conversation necessarily just has to be geared towards Bijan Robinson. If we're talking about running backs and the draft for the Bills, there's a ton of really, really good backs in this draft class for any team who is looking for one, whether you're looking for one early, whether you're looking for one late. There's just a multitude of guys who I think tick a lot of boxes in terms of possibility and skill set. You know, you've got Bijan Robinson, but Jahmyr Gibbs from Alabama, who is the RB2 in this draft, would be the RB1 hands down, if not for Bijan Robinson, at least in my eyes. And then you've got Zach Charbonnet, you've got Tyjae Spears, you've got Devin Achane from Texas A&M, you even got guys like Tank Bigsby from Auburn, who I like. I like Kendre Miller from TCU. Some people like Eric Gray, some people like Kenny McIntosh. Like there's a lot of value. Someone who I like late is Muhammad Ibrahim, or Ibrahim, depending on how you want to pronounce the name, from Minnesota. Had some injuries and some tread on the tires. He's not going to pull away, but he's a hammer and he's a thumper. Like there's a lot of value at running back throughout this entire draft. So I wouldn't rule out the Bills taking a running back at any point in this draft if the value is there. Because again, there's a bunch of good running backs in this draft. And like I mentioned earlier, Harris's contract doesn't necessarily handcuff you to the point where you have to keep Damian Harris. So I wouldn't rule out the Bills drafting a running back in this draft, whether it's Bijan Robinson in the first or a running back at any point going forward. But just on the conversation of Bijan, I don't think he's there at 27. Like I really think he goes before that. He's one of the best dudes in this draft. Again, positional value is a whole nother conversation. If you don't think running back is worthy of a first round pick, no matter who the prospect, that's completely fine. But if you're talking about guys who are like the best football players in this draft, Bijan is up there with almost everyone. So I don't think he lasts to 27, but we'll see. We'll see. Ooh, NFL Draft Fanatics puts this up here. I think it might have changed since then, I hope, but he says 70 watching. There's more watching now, but only 29 likes. Let's try that like count up there, please. And thank you, folks, if you would be so kind. Spin asks, what would be the most you would be willing to give up to get Hopkins? I'd give a second round pick for Hopkins. I would love to give a third or, a combination of day 3 picks. And honestly, it's going to depend on how much contract you're eating and what the contract looks like and how you're able to lay that out. But I would give up a second because ideally I would like the Bills to add a receiver on not day 1, but on day 2. So round 2 or round 3. And you're drafting one of those guys hoping that they could be something consistent for you. So I have no problem giving a day 2 pick to get somebody who I know is an established product and who is one of the best players at his position in the league. So I would give a second round pick for DeAndre Hopkins. But the money is going to depend on it a little bit. Ooh, Backbone 5 says, if Bijan is there at 27, they have to take him. He probably won't be there, though, especially with Dallas picking at 26. Dallas would take Bijan, especially because he's a Texas dude and Jerry Jones loves running back. So very fair, very fair. Johnny Blaze says, people need to stop saying generational. And he says, generational doesn't mean every 3 to 5 years. But I don't think that's what it means with Bijan. I think he's generational because he's like one of the best running back prospects to like come out. Like he's up there he's up there with like top dudes. And Johnny comes in and says, there's a generational running back that comes out of the draft every 3 to 5 years. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think the last one was Saquon because Saquon was a stud, as is Bijan. I don't think there's necessarily a generational running back that comes out every 3 to 5 years. But if you have any thoughts, feel free to throw them in there. Fair point here from Hefe KC. Ooh, Chiefs fan in the building. What up? Hefe says, Bijan played in the Big 12, so I'm iffy on him. That's fair. They don't play defense in the Big 12, which is a very fair point. But I think when you look at the way he won, it projects very well to the NFL. It is very sustainable in terms of seeing the contact balance, the agility, the elusiveness, the power, the speed, the vision, the hands in the receiving game. Like, he's winning in ways that aren't just due to poor competition. He's winning in ways that are sustainable in the NFL. And then you add it in with the size and him being 5'11" and 215 pounds. And he's got the frame, he's got the body, like he's good between the ears from a football perspective. Like, he ticks almost every box. The only thing that would make Bijan better is if instead of running a 4.46 40, he ran like a 4.42. Like, that would push him into another stratosphere in terms of prospect ability. But I think it's a fair point. You know, again, they don't play defense in the Big 12, but the way he wins, I'm not too worried. But that's fair. What else? Questions? Oh, Daryl says there's no defensive tackle on the roster past a 1-year contract. What round do you think they draft one? We're going to talk about that, Daryl, when we get to the defensive tackle part of this episode. I like where your head's at. Very fair. Oh, I don't think. No, Johnny says McCaffrey before that. I don't think McCaffrey was a generational. McCaffrey wasn't talked about generationally from a running back perspective. I didn't view him as a generational running back. I don't think he was talked in the same breath as Saquon and as Bijan. I may be wrong on that piece, but I don't think McCaffrey was talked. McCaffrey was talked about as a good running back and a good piece, but I don't think he was talked about in the same manner as Saquon and Bijan. Or if he was, at least in my eyes, he was not. Like, I don't view McCaffrey as, I mean, it's a little different to say it now considering where he's risen to in the NFL, but I don't think, for me, if I'm evaluating, I didn't view McCaffrey as generational in the same way that I viewed what Saquon was and what Bijan Robinson was. But teach their own. What else? All right. So again, the running back spot. Timeshare is going to be the biggest question for this Buffalo Bills team. Is it James Cook's backfield? If they draft someone else, where do they draft them? What happens? And if we're just looking at it in a vacuum in terms of what they have now, it is pretty interesting. Like, even just from a Nyheim Hines perspective, he's got some juice and a skill set aspect to his game that not a lot of other backs on this team have. And when I say not a lot of other, it's kind of like tongue in cheek because there's only 2 other running backs really. So he represents a different piece, although he does have some similar skill set aspects to his game like James Cook does. But we'll see what this timeshare looks like. I think that's the biggest question. Then based on what the timeshare looks like, I think that also ties into what kind of scheme the Bills lean into. If it is a James Cook backfield, I think you see more zone scheme. If it is a Damian Harris backfield, or, well, if he factors in more, I think that's where you'll see more of those gap scheme pieces or more duo or more inside zone, get him running downhill. He's also very good running out of the I formation, running out of the backfield, those under center runs as a whole. So maybe you see more Reggie Gilliam in that way with him, and then maybe that leads into more play action. So depending on what the timeshare looks like, I think that's a very interesting question to have. That's the biggest question I have for this running back group. What does the timeshare look like? Who gets the lion's share? Who's the 2? Who's the 3? Is it consistent every week? Does it change based on matchup or opponent? And then we go back and forth. And then there is the wild card question of, if Bijan's there at 27, what do you do? Very interesting question. Now, move on to the next position grouping here. Wide receiver, which is a bit of a contentious one for Bills fans. Gabe Davis has been thrown through the ringer. We've had some questions already in the show about DeAndre Hopkins. If we're looking at this wide receiver grouping right now, the Buffalo Bills have a grouping of Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Deontay Hardy, Khalil Shakir, Trent Sherfield, Desmond Patman, Keyshawn Johnson, not that Keyshawn Johnson, a different one with a different spelling, and Isaiah Coulter. Gabe Davis is a unrestricted free agent in 2024. So is Trent Sherfield. Deontay Hardy is an unrestricted free agent in 2025. The only wide receivers on the roster for 2024 are Stephon Diggs, Deontay Hardy, and Khalil Shakir. The only wide receivers on the roster for 2025 are Diggs and Shakir. So again, 2024, you only got Diggs, Hardy, Shakir. 2025, just Diggs and Shakir. With this grouping, I think there's a lot of potential biggest question candidates here when it comes to the Bills wide receiver grouping. So my answer here is kind of a cheat answer, and it's one that potentially I tried to come up with one that addresses all of them to a degree. And that question really is, what does the future at the wide receiver group look like? It starts with Gabe Davis. He's an unrestricted free agent in 2024. The wide receiver free agent market kind of came down to earth a little bit after what we saw last year with Christian Kirk and Zay Jones. This year, it kind of settled a little bit. You had guys like Jacoby Myers only go for about $11 million average annual value. So things kind of came back down to earth. We saw the deal that Juju got, which was the same deal that Myers got to go to New England. Those were like the top guys in free agency at the wide receiver position. So maybe the market is starting to reset itself a little bit at wide receiver, which will impact what Gabe Davis gets in 2024. But does Gabe Davis come back? Does he resign? Another question, is Khalil Shakir your slot receiver, or do you want him working into the boundary, or both? Is he a multiple alignment guy? I talked about it last year going into the season. I thought he was more than just a slot. I thought he could work as a boundary receiver based on what he did at Boise State. I'm still a fan of his game. I thought the Bills got great value for him in the 5th round. But depending on how you view Khalil Shakir, that dictates what kind of wide receiver you go after in the draft, especially when tied into what may happen with Gabe Davis. If you're not confident that you can bring Gabe Davis back, does Shakir become that boundary receiver, and do you look more for a slot receiver this year? Or if Shakir is your slot guy, are you looking more for a boundary receiver to potentially replace Gabe Davis next year and give you some more juice this year? Then you tie in the Deontay Hardy signing, which I like. I think it raises the floor for that slot position, adds some juice, adds some speed, adds some legitimate electricity to the wide receiver group in a way that I don't think they've had. I think he's different after the catch than Isaiah McKenzie. No disrespect to Isaiah McKenzie, but big piece with him. Can he stay healthy? You haven't seen what a full season of Deontay Hardy looks like, because even, back when he was with the Saints, as Deontay Harris was picking up knocks. We haven't really seen a full season and him get a full workload, snap share, and roll in a team consistently. So can he stay healthy? What does that look like? If so, that ties into what happens to Khalil Shakir's role, because Deontay Hardy is going to be, I don't want to say he's a slot only, but he's best in the slot, and he's got some gadgetry aspects to his game. Does less Deontay Hardy, does that mean more Shakir in the slot than initially planned if Hardy gets banged up? And if Hardy gets banged up, is it a Trent Sherfield, Khalil Shakir timeshare in the slot? And who does that favor and by how much? And what do you lean into? Because again, if you wanted Shakir to see more reps on the boundary, Hardy's going to be your slot guy. If Hardy drops down, do you try to plug Sherfield in there? Do you bring Shakir into the slot a little bit more? Do you try to work Gabe Davis into the slot a little bit? Does Stephon Diggs see the slot? His slot usage and percentage increased significantly last year versus what it was the year before. There's a lot of dominoes that have serious ramifications for this position group for the Buffalo Bills, not only in 2023, but beyond. And if you want to see what the Bills will look for in the draft of wide receiver, I think it starts with, what do you do with what you currently have on the roster? What are you doing with Gabe Davis? What are you doing with Khalil Shakir? And with Gabe Davis, I mean, we know that he's wide receiver 2 for this team. Whether or not you think he's a valuable wide receiver 2 or not, or is an actual wide receiver 2, whole nother conversation. But we know this coaching staff and organization thinks very highly of him. Josh Allen thinks very highly of him. Allen spoke about him today at the podium for OTAs and said similar things that he said almost every time that he's been asked about Gabe Davis going into the offseason last year, going into the season 2 years ago. He talks about Davis being reliable, doing the dirty work, doing what's asked of him, being reliable, and being someone that he trusts both on and off the field. We know Davis is that guy, but for 2024, again, like I said, all you have right now is official guys on the roster next year at this time: Stephon Diggs, Deontay Hardy, Khalil Shakir. And Deontay Hardy, has questions around his health. Khalil Shakir, we still don't know what kind of pro he's going to be. I think the trajectory is solid, and I like what he projects at. But as of right now, we still don't know. Shakir could be just a guy, and he's not on the roster, or he's a solid core receiver member of this team for the next several years who looks to get a second contract. And then again in 2025, it's just Stephon Diggs, it's just Khalil Shakir. So there's a ton of dominoes for this position, and it starts with Gabe Davis, Khalil Shakir, and I really think Deontay Hardy. Like, who is playing the slot? Who's working into the boundary? What alignments and usages do you have for each person, and by how much? And then that dictates what you're looking for in the draft. Are you looking for somebody who's more of a best in slot kind of guy? Are you looking for somebody who's more best in the boundary? Are you looking for somebody who can live in both worlds because you're trying to really go with the whole versatility and positionless receiver type aspect? You're trying to throw in different personnel groupings and looks and dictate more to a defense than you have previously. And when you have that versatility and variability, it allows you to lean into those avenues a little bit more. So I think that's a very interesting conversation to have as well. But again, the biggest question, and again, I tried to use the biggest question to tie all of these things together, really is what does the future look like for wide receiver at this position group? Because it could look drastically different next year. Like, we're sitting here with Khalil Shakir now. At this point next year, that arrow might be trending more up. It might be down. It might still be, plateau. Deontay Hardy, we might be thrilled at the value signing that he was this year at this time next year, or could be a waste, or we still don't know because he got hurt. Like, maybe there's a rookie that came in and performed well. Maybe there's a rookie who was going into year 2 next year, and we're looking at that trajectory. A lot of questions when it comes to that position grouping. Connor says, I take a wide receiver in round 1 just for the 5th-year option. That's fair. I just don't like the receiver class a ton this year with how much I've studied them. Again, I would be okay with a first-round pick for Jackson Smith-Njigba, Zay Flowers, or Jordan Addison. I think a lot of how this class falls on the board is going to be determined by need. Just using Jackson Smith-Njigba as an example, like, he is suited for the slot heavily, primarily. I think he's a dude who in the NFL probably sees slot snaps 80 to 85% of the time. So his value is tied to how much 11 personnel do you run? And if you do run 11 personnel, what kind of offense do you run? What kind of slot receiver do you need? Do you want more of a power slot? Do you want more of a long speed guy? Are you a vertical offense? Are you looking for him to just leverage space on the in the middle of the field? Like, what are you looking for? Are you looking for shake and yards after catch? Like, that might change where you value him. Or again, also, if do you need a slot receiver? Do you want your first receiver or a guy you're going to invest first round resources in? Do you want them to have more Z wide receiver potential or an X potential? Like, do you want them to have more size? What kind of, again, frame, size, skill set, offense? I think that muddies the waters for the first round wide receivers. But I like where your head's at, especially if you're trying to give Josh Allen some consistent weapons. My only issue is I just don't love the wide receivers in this year's class, but fair piece. Oh, cool comment here from Johnny Blaze, who says Shakir's been working out with Eric Moulds. I think I heard that. Maybe I'm making that up in my head, but I don't know. DF comes in and says, I think Shakir starts at slot. Fair point. I do wonder. I think he is better in the slot, but I do think he can work on the boundary. And I like that dual alignment potential for him. Y-Town's King, what up? He says, do you think that Jalen Hyatt is the deep threat that would improve all of our over-the-middle issues? Oof. He said, I think so, because he can be used like Emmanuel Sanders was. Here's the thing with Jalen Hyatt. He comes from a very gimmicky Mickey Mouse offense at Tennessee. It's the Art Briles Baylor offense that is just ridiculously spread out in terms of how they space the field. And you don't really see a lot of NFL type routes from receivers in this offense. Sometimes you don't even see routes from them. If you're looking at a guy like Jalen Hyatt, there's reps where he's away from the throw. He's not even running a route, like, because he knows the ball's going to come in his way. Most of his routes are just reading, leveraging what's going on. Okay, if you're in one-on-one coverage, if this guy's 10 yards off, you do this. If he sits, you do this. He's getting matched up against safeties and against guys that, from a skill set standpoint and ability and frame standpoint, won't be covering him in the NFL. His speed is real. His speed is legitimate. I know his combine numbers weren't as great as they potentially could have been. I think he is a legitimate deep threat. I think he's different than Emmanuel Sanders because Emmanuel Sanders was such a technically sound player even early on in his career, but from a route running standpoint and a football IQ standpoint, he was a very close to a complete receiver, aside from being on the smaller side. He was tremendous. I think Hyatt as a rookie is just pure deep threat. You're using him to just clear out space for the underneath and the intermediate, which has some value. And then if he gets on top of a guy and gets past a guy, you chuck it up there and you let him run under it and see what happens. He does have good ball skills. He is good at tracking the ball. He does have good hands. So that's a fun piece. Like, you can chuck it up there and he'll find it and go get it. But he doesn't have a ton of shake, doesn't have a ton of wiggle after the catch. He's more, you try to get it to him on the move and let him keep going. You're not going to just, flip the ball to him and then he's going to shake a couple dudes and make his own yards and make his own way and get upfield. So I think he's got a bit of a different skill set, but he is a legitimate deep threat. I think he would help. I think he would help the intermediate and underneath for anyone that he goes to, because again, his speed has to be respected. You can use him to clear out routes, although there is some predictability in that. I just wonder what his long-term piece is. Can he run NFL caliber routes consistently? How does he face face up from a physical and frame standpoint? He is slight, he is skinny, he is small. What does he do when dudes get physical with him in the route stem, get physical with him at the line? He didn't see a ton of press in college or a ton of jams. So it's not that he can't do it. It's one of those absence of evidence is not evidence of absence type deals. So how does he hold up with the physicality at the line and in the stem and at the catch point, really? I think there are some questions around that for him as a total prospect, but he is a legitimate deep threat. Where are we going? Oh, Tim bringing back the conversation on CMC. He says, looking back at CMC's college scouting report, one of them, it seems like a big knock on him was his frame. That and Derrick Henry was in the same class. Ooh, it's funny. Yeah, Henry went in the second round. People just didn't, even when he went to Tennessee early, I think he was seeing second string reps to DeMarco Murray. I remember I had Derrick Henry his first and I think second year in fantasy football. I just kept waiting for him to break out and for them to give him the ball because I had faith in him, and Tennessee just kept not giving him the ball. Again, from what I remember, and maybe I'm just tying it with my own evaluation, McCaffrey was good, was definitely a good running back coming out. I don't think he was talked about as he was a generational guy like Saquon was, or Bijan Robinson. Again, Saquon was a top 5 prospect in his class, or top 3. Same thing for Bijan. I don't think that was the case with McCaffrey, but he is very good. Oh, Walter says, if you have a wide receiver 1, I feel like wide receiver 2 is a churn and burn position. There's an abundance of wide receiver 2s coming into the league every year. I don't see the value of resigning one. I'm guessing that is in reference to bringing back Gabe Davis. Oh, Daryl says, I think they re-signed Davis early in the season. Oh, very interesting. Oh, spicy from Billy. Billy says, trade a first and Ed Oliver to the Giants for Dexter Lawrence. I don't think they do that. Oh, I don't know if I would do that. That's interesting. Dexter Lawrence had a hell of a year last year. All-pro candidate type of year. Man, there was just a ton of really good interior players. 2 of them being in New Jersey with Dexter Lawrence and Quinnen Williams. Oh, you basically giving up a first for Dexter. Not that. I think I would do that. I don't know. I have to think about it. That's pretty awesome. That's a spicy one. Very interesting. Johnny says, I think the Bills are going to target Flowers in the first. Oh, and that Moulds posts his workouts with Shakir a lot. That's cool. Eric Moulds is one of the most I think, or at least for me, underrated Buffalo Bills of all time. I love Eric Moulds. I hate that he has that playoff record in the game against Miami and the Bills lost that game, because it makes me not want to look back at that game and appreciate that game because the Bills lost to Miami, but he's awesome. Elvis comes in and says, give me these 2, Jonathan Mingo and Cedric Tillman. Dudes with bigger frames, bigger bodies, a little X potential. They stand out in this draft class that is filled with a lot of smaller guys, slot guys, Z receiver potential guys, slender frames, less weight. So very interesting. Very interesting. Oh, appreciate you, Y. Great show. Smash that like. Thank you very much, Y. I appreciate you. I appreciate you. Yeah, I feel you. Moldo's underrated. He deserved better. So that's the wide receiver conversation. Again, biggest question, what does this group look like? Also from a floor perspective, if we're forgetting the future, we're just looking at 2023. How much of the floor got raised with Deontay Hardy and with the additions of Trent Sherfield, right? What can you lean into schematically and X's and O's wise with Sherfield and Hardy? I think you've added more speed. You've added a significant speed element to your wide receiver room. Sherfield also gives you some power slot opportunity with his frame and his blocking ability, and his ability to function off of RPOs. So I'm interested from that perspective as well. Like if the Bills don't address receiver at all in this draft, I do think they will. It's just a matter of when and how the board falls. Again, I think the best value for this wide receiver class is in rounds 2 through 4. My favorite value pick of the draft was Jonathan Mingo in round 4. I don't know if he lasts there now, considering all the buzz he's getting. Again, a lot of it is due to just physical measurables and his size and frame. Like, 6'2", 220 plus pounds, runs a 4.46, 40. Dude can break tackles from linebackers and safeties, take one to the house, high point the football, moss guys downfield on back shoulder catches or cowboy routes. So, and his route running is better than he was able to showcase at Ole Miss. So he was a dude who I loved in like round 4 or round 3. Now I'm wondering if he goes before pick 91 for the Bills at round 3. Oof, a lot of drama with this wide receiver grouping. But overall, I don't think it's a class that I love. Whoa, really? Elvis says Peter Schrager has him going in round 1. Peter Schrager has Jonathan Mingo going in round 1? Is that what this statement is in regards to? I feel like I can't do the show until I know this answer. Man, that's wild. I will bring up this comment from DF who says the problem is the best value for inside linebackers rounds 2 through 3. Round 4 for a wide receiver is too late. Depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for somebody to be a wide receiver 2 as a rookie, round 4 might be too late. If you're looking for somebody to be your wide receiver 3 or 4 as a rookie and develop into a wide receiver 2 in year 2, I think round 4 is okay. That's where you're looking. For me, that's where I have the Mingos of the world and the Xavier Hutchinsons and guys like that. Wow. Elvis says yes. Man, Peter Schrager had Jonathan Mingo going in the first. What a time. I liked him at the Senior Bowl. I've talked about him so much on this show, and I was like, oh, cool, 3rd, 4th round guy. Man. How the turntables. Let's move to the next position grouping. Let's move to tight end. Dawson Knox, Quentin Morris, Zach Davidson, who I mentioned earlier. So Dawson Knox signed that extension earlier last year, which makes him a UFA in 2027. Quentin Morris is an exclusive rights free agent next offseason in 2024. That means he is a player with fewer than 3 accrued seasons and an expired contract. If his original team, meaning the Buffalo Bills, offers him a 1-year contract at the league minimum based on his credited seasons, the player cannot negotiate with other teams. I like Quentin Morris, former wide receiver. I think his former receiver chops showed well at receiver or at tight end in the preseason this past year. I thought he got better as the season went on. I like his size and his frame. I like how he's built. I like the speed. I like the athleticism. I like the release package at the line. My biggest question for this tight end grouping and this position grouping as a whole is Quentin Morris tight end too? I think there's a lot of quality and depth at tight end in this draft class on really every day, on day 1, on day 2, especially on day 2, but even in early day 3. Zach Kuntz from Old Dominion is someone who I really, really, really liked. He's another freak though, in terms of size and length, being 6'7" and how he can move. So maybe he's going to creep up onto day 2 into that 3rd round, but there is good tight end value in this draft. Do the Bills dip into this position in the draft? I'm fine with Quentin Morris as tight end too, but I also think you could upgrade. But then there's also the other side of the conversation where rookie tight ends usually don't make a tremendous impact, and tight end is also a position with usually a pretty significant learning curve. And there's also no guarantee, tied into that learning curve and that rookie impact. There's no guarantee that a rookie tight end comes in and beats out Quentin Morris or gives you more than Quentin Morris could give you. So I think there is some risk reward there, but there's a lot of good tight ends in this class, whether you're looking in round 1 with the Kincaids and the Mayers. And I'm not a huge guy or a fan of Luke Musgrave, but I know some people really like him. He didn't really wow me at the Senior Bowl. You have, as Dan Kincaid puts in, Darnell Washington with 3 exclamation points. You have Darnell Washington, who is just a mountain of a man, blocks like an extra offensive lineman, but has the size and frame and length to just moss dudes, especially down in the red zone. I'm wondering what he becomes as a receiver and as a pass catcher. He doesn't start out the fastest because of his size and his frame and his length, but once he gets moving, he's athletic and he's a bit fluid. He's a real interesting one. It'll be interesting to see if he goes to a team and functions as their tight end 2, or if he has tight end 1 expectations. I think if he goes to a power run scheme team and can just function off of play action with that, it would really, 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 really kind of allow him to flourish a bit. But that's a name that we have there as well. He's probably like a day one, day two guy, depending on the team. And then further day two guys, you've got the Sam Laportas of the world, and the day three guys, you've got actually even on day two, so you still got Tucker Kraft, maybe Schoonmaker from Michigan crawls into round two, or he's in round three. Like, there's just a lot of value at tight end. So if the Bills want to add to this position grouping, there's a lot of good candidates on day one and day two, and even into early day three. But it's all going to come down to, for me, the biggest question with this group, which is Quintin Morris tight end 2? I think he's fine to be tight end 2, but I also think it is completely fine to upgrade from Quintin Morris. Which, again, no disrespect to Quintin Morris, but we'll see what happens with Quintin Morris. Now, next position, offensive tackle. Big conversation piece. If you watch the show regularly, I've been talking about Spencer Brown all offseason. It's going to be no different right here as I take a drink of water. We look at the offensive tackle group for the Buffalo Bills. Dion Dawkins, Spencer Brown, David Quessenberry, Tommy Doyle, Ryan Vandermark, Alec Anderson. Everyone that I just listed but David Quessenberry is on the roster in 2025. The Bills have no offensive tackles on the roster in 2025. Wait, let me go back here. I don't know if I said this wrong in my head or said it out loud. So everyone that I mentioned, Dawkins, Spencer Brown, Tommy Doyle, Ryan Vandermark, Alec Anderson, are all on the roster in 2024. The Bills have no tackle on the roster in 2025. Dion Dawkins has a void year cap hit that year. He also has one for 2026 as well. So the Bills do not have an offensive tackle on the roster for 2025 as of now under contract. My biggest question here, and it has been the question that I've been asking all offseason. Ooh, DF says, this conversation is annoying me, Ant. This team is way too happy at the right tackle position. They could be, but this is the question. This is what it's going to tie into. The biggest question here is, what does Spencer Brown look like in year 3? What do you have out of year 3, Spencer Brown? Year 2, Spencer Brown, as we've gone over here on the show, still had that mercurial play. He was tied for 69th amongst 88 tackles in pass blocking efficiency. Of the 206 offensive linemen with at least 20% of pass protection snaps, he was tied for 180th amongst all offensive linemen in pass block efficiency and true pass sets. He was 70th amongst the 88 offensive tackles in true pass sets. From a volume standpoint, he was tied for the 8th most pressures allowed last year amongst all offensive linemen. He was tied for the 5th most amongst all tackles. We've been over it on this show, so I don't want to harp on it too much. Yes, the injuries have impacted his career trajectory to this point, maybe even more than it would most offensive tackles, because, again, like we said on the show, played 8-man football in high school. Then he went to the University of Northern Iowa. Then he sat out the COVID year and came into the NFL very, very raw. And he needed reps to get better and literally learn to play tackle on the job in the NFL, which is already hard before you introduced injuries to that process. Yes, the Bills organization likes him. The coaching staff likes him. And yes, he still could be a good tackle. Like I in this league, I don't think that's out of the question. But right now, no matter the reason, no matter the cause, no matter how you slice it, he's a very inconsistent right tackle at this very time. And he has a very mercurial nature to his game. He's got some really cool, high highs, some cool moments where he's mauling dudes or he's using that athleticism where he's functioning in space. And then he's got those really low lows where he's getting beat in like a half a second and falling on his face. If you're betting on him taking a jump in year 3 to show that he can be the guy for the future, that's completely fine. To me, it's just a little risky. Now, that doesn't mean he can't do it. That doesn't mean that he won't do it. It also doesn't mean that the Bills are out on him or don't believe in him. But last year, again, no matter what the reason, I think the reasons are valid. Like I've stated this all offseason. Like there's always that caveat. Like he's had that mercurial play and the poor performances on tape and with the advanced metrics. I understand the reasoning behind it, but at the end of the day, the on-field execution is extremely inconsistent and very mercurial. He was a vulnerability in pass protection last year. And for me, I just don't think you can continue to have that with Josh Allen. Now, Bills brought in Connor McGovern to start at left guard. So maybe if Connor McGovern works out and you have more consistency from left tackle to right guard, maybe that can cover up for Spencer Brown a little bit. Maybe a full offseason of, practices and health and reps and chemistry with Ryan Bates on that right side, maybe that helps him raise his floor even more and potentially scratch the surface of his ceiling even more. But Spencer Brown is the biggest question at the tackle spot, both in season and heading into the draft right now. Because I also think, too, if you're looking at it from the draft perspective, what are you looking at in the draft? Because even if you're not focusing on just Spencer Brown and you're looking at this tackle group as a whole, again, Dion Dawkins, Spencer Brown, David Quessenberry, Tommy Doyle, Ryan Vandermark, Alec Anderson. Dion Dawkins is Dion Dawkins. Spencer Brown, we've already talked about. David Quessenberry, I like his story. I like his veteran presence. I like that he offers you a little bit at left and right tackle. I still see him as the slow-footed dude who got beat around the corner by Bryce Huff against the Jets and got Josh Allen's elbow hurt. That may be unfair to place on him. He also gutted out that performance against Miami and the Heat when he was all injured and everything. He had a lot of gutsy performances. I think it was the Miami game, or maybe blending it with another one, but he's gutted through a lot. I think you could also use some youth and just overall depth and athleticism at this position in general. Like, we don't know what we have in Tommy Doyle. He got banged up last year. Ryan Vandermark, Alec Anderson, even bigger questions. So you're looking at a top three of Dion Dawkins, Spencer Brown, David Quessenberry. Like, that top three is a little shaky. So I would like to address offensive tackle in this draft regardless, but depending on how you feel about Spencer Brown, if you're the Bills, are you looking to draft a replacement for him? Are you looking to draft just competition for him? And if Spencer Brown wins out, cool, then you have depth. Are you cool at tackle in general and you're not going to invest in this position at all? This is a very interesting one to look at because I do think, again, I like the upside of Spencer Brown. Sorry, I was thinking of Darnell Wright and I thought I said Wright out loud. I like the upside that Spencer Brown presents. And I still think it's there. You see the athleticism. You saw the RAS score. All of these pieces. Yes. I understand all of it, and I'm fine with it. I do think the reasons of why he has struggled up to this point in his career and why he had such a mercurial performance last year, that is very valid. He needed reps in the offseason. Very raw from a football IQ standpoint and from a technicality standpoint, coming out of Northern Iowa, playing 8-man football. He needed as much time on task as possible to get up to NFL standards and NFL level. That's very fair. Like, I think it's a fair caveat to throw that in there and say, well, look at all the injuries. That's why he's off course. That's fine. But at the end of the day, he's extremely inconsistent. He was a legitimate vulnerability at right tackle next year. You had no idea what you were getting from him from rep to rep, snap to snap, and pass protection. I don't like to put together a ton of negative film clips for players when I do episodes or when I put things out on Twitter. But there were so many readily available clips of him just getting waxed. And I think it would be nice if he takes a jump in year 3. I just think if you're thinking that he's going to take a jump in year 3, it's very much hope-based and it's very much projection-based. That's where I stand on the offensive tackle piece. And that's why he's the biggest question for this offensive tackle grouping. What does year 3 Spencer Brown look like? Because if he's solid, does he beat out who they draft? Do they not draft anyone? And they're just thinking that he's going to take a jump and he's the guy. If year 3 Spencer Brown is anywhere close to what year 2 Spencer Brown was, that's a problem. I've gone over the advanced metrics here already in this episode. I've gone over them at several other points this offseason. He's just too up and down. He's too much of a roller coaster. And I think you need to get off that roller coaster. And if that's because he raised the floor of his game and he gives you more consistency and sustainability, cool. That's awesome. I just think it's fairly risky to go into the year with Spencer Brown penciled in as your right tackle number 1, especially with what he did last year. Again, the injuries are valid, but it is just a little worrisome. And what do we got? Comment DF says if we picked offensive tackle round 1, I would be very, very happy. I like this comment from Thomas. He says, "Give me Darnell Wright or give me Def." Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I also really like Darnell Wright. I like a lot of the tackles towards the top end of the board. So that's a fair point in conversation as well. Let's move on to the guard and center position. I kind of combine them into one grouping. We're going to start with guard. So if we're looking at guard, Ryan Bates, Connor McGovern, David Edwards, Ike Budker, and Kevin Jarvis. If we're looking at 2024, only Ryan Bates and Connor McGovern are on the roster in 2024. I think the biggest question for this grouping, and it ties into the center position as well, is how much of an improvement do the Bills get at guard in Connor McGovern versus what they got from Roger Saffold last year? I've spoken about Connor McGovern on the show, broken down his tape in the Cover One film room. Just some highlights as we go through now. He's better in pass protection than he is as a run blocker. He's not a people mover in the run game. He's more of an escorter, more of a shepherd. He's athletic. He's smart. He can move. I don't think McGovern is going to set the world on fire. I don't think he's going to come in and necessarily be an all-pro. But Roger Saffold last year, with all due respect, because he was a Pro Bowler, Roger Saffold was a D, or at his absolute best, a C last year. Connor McGovern, I think he comes in, I think he gives you a B minus to a B at your left guard spot, which isn't the sexiest thing in the world, but that's a significant upgrade from what you had last year in terms of consistency and performance and on-field ability, not to mention the athleticism. If you're going from a D to a B minus, that's a huge jump. If you're looking at it in a vacuum, and you're like, oh, well, dude's only a B minus. That's a lot better than a friggin' D. And then I think I'm in this system and scheme with Cromer and with what Josh Allen does. I think Connor McGovern can be a solid B, maybe even a B plus. But I think that's the biggest question. Like, how much of an improvement is Connor McGovern over Roger Saffold last year? Does he give you consistency and sustainability on at least one side of the line? Even if Spencer Brown stays at right tackle, fine. Is your left side at least solid? From Deion Dawkins to Connor McGovern to Mitch Morse, are you solid there in terms of pre-snap communication and identification, in terms of pass protection setting, in terms of your rules, in terms of non-leakage coming from that left side? Are you consistent on at least one side of your line? The worst thing that can happen in this Bills offensive line is to have the roller coaster at left guard and right tackle like they did last year with Roger Saffold and Spencer Brown, respectively. So the biggest question here at guard is how much of an improvement is Connor McGovern over Roger Saffold from last year? I think a side question here as well is, what does the depth look like overall on the interior with David Edwards and Ike Bodker, but also with how that ties into Mitch Morse? With Mitch Morse's concussion history, if he goes down, does Greg Manx step in, or is it Ryan Bates? And are you putting Ryan Bates into center and then you're shuffling David Edwards or Ike Bodker into guard? After your starting five, which at this point, as of right now, is Deion Dawkins, Connor McGovern, Mitch Morse, Ryan Bates, and Spencer Brown. After that starting five, what is your next best starting five if Morse goes down? Is it Manx at center? Is it Ryan Bates at center and Edwards at right guard, or Ike Bodker at right guard, or McGovern at right guard and Edwards at left guard, and with Bates at center? What games do you play? What shuffling do you have if Mitch Morse goes down? That's also the biggest question at center if we're looking at that position in a vacuum. The health of Mitch Morse in 2023 and beyond. I hate even saying it because I don't want to speak it into existence in the universe. But one more concussion for Mitch Morse could legitimately knock him out for the year or his career, or cause him to just legitimately reevaluate things and be fine to come back, but say, I don't want to. And as of right now, it's only him and Greg Manx on this roster at center in 2023. In 2024, it's just Mitch Morse. And I've said it for years. I think he's gotten a little more appreciation now. Mitch Morse does so much for this offense, not even just the offensive line, but the offense in general. Like what he does in terms of helping to set pass protections, what he does to help get the offensive line set, his ability to function on pop sets, his ability to execute false pulls and end up as a left or right tackle, setting the width of the pocket. He's great in space. He's great on the move. He's great between the ears. He's a great locker room guy. He's smart. He's heady, high character, all this stuff. Like, he ticks so many boxes for any offense. Good centers are hard to come by. There's a reason why you usually see a good, heady, veteran, knowledgeable center paired with a young QB to help that QB develop. It would be nice to have Mitch Morse around for the long haul, but I think that's a significant question. What does his health look like? Concussions are a tricky thing. Like, you see guys, once they get one concussion, they're susceptible to others. It's like dislocating your shoulder, and we've seen Morse have multiple concussions. And once you get one, or especially two, but even once you just get one, you don't need to really get smacked in the head like hard. It can be the gentlest hit that when you see it on the replay and you're like, that gave him a concussion? Like, really? It's a tricky injury to predict or protect against. It's a tricky injury to come back from. Like, brain health is no joke. So that's a huge question. Mitch Morse's health for 2023 and beyond. And then again, I think you tie that into the guard position. In an ideal world, again, you got McGovern and Bates, and Morse is your center if you're looking at the interior offensive line. But if Morse goes down, who kicks into center? Is it Manx? Is it Bates? Are you testing the rest of your guard depth with Edwards and Butker? I think that's potentially what you're looking at with why you bring Edwards in addition to just having good depth on the interior in general. But there's significant questions there if Mitch Morse goes down. But if we're just looking at the surface in terms of everybody's healthy and everything is sunshine and rainbows, the biggest question on the interior, and especially if we're just focusing at guard, is how much of an improvement is Connor McGovern over Roger Saffold? How much consistency and stability does he give you on the left side of the line? You give Dion Dawkins a better dance partner. You give Mitch Morse a better dance partner, especially in terms of athleticism. It helps them do their job a little bit better. And if you get consistent play from McGovern, it adds consistency all down the road. And again, I think that potentially helps the right side if Spencer Brown is there, if you know you are consistently stable on that left side of the ball. So that's a fair point. That's a fair point. Mm-hmm. Al Shar says, I hate to say it, but I think Darnell Wright will be long gone before we pick. I do as well. I think he goes to Tampa Bay at 19. He might even go earlier than that. Initially it was Paris Johnson and Broderick Jones were tackles 1 and tackle 2, depending on how you view Peter Skoronski from Northwestern. But now there's conversation that Darnell Wright is up in the mix for tackle 1 or tackle 2 on some teams' boards or some analyst boards. I think he's a good fit in Tampa Bay, with them potentially taking Tristan Wirfs from right tackle and moving him to left, plug Darnell Wright into right tackle. You just have 2 tremendous pillars and bookends on the offensive line. So it'll be interesting. Tim says, by that logic, Ant, if the Bills learn from Saffold, won't they similarly learn from Spencer Brown and draft a good tackle early? Potentially, but that's also tied into what they feel about Spencer Brown. Roger Saffold was long in the tooth. He was at the end of his career. His problems weren't the mental aspects like football IQ and picking up things. He was just limited because of his mobility and lack of athleticism, which he was never the most athletic dude, but he just had a lot of mileage on the tires combined with his age, and he just couldn't physically get to the areas that they needed him to. I think they might view Spencer Brown differently. So I don't know if this is necessarily oranges to oranges or apples to apples. I think it might be a little different. Spencer Brown is much younger, is very raw, somebody that needs development. So even just off of that, like, I don't think you're ready to jettison a guy into the sun that early. But also, if they view him higher, if they view him in terms of still being able to achieve that ceiling, it's not necessarily a similar situation. But I would like them to get some pieces there on the offensive line. DF says, Ant, could we draft a center this year, plug and play at center guard when needed, and start him at center next year? You could. But then you just have to invest in round 1 or 2 or 3. And then you're also banking on like Mitch Morse not coming back. Is he retiring? Are you cutting him? Are you getting rid of him? Like, what's the play there? Like, you just get into this muddied mix of taking someone in rounds 1 or 2 or 3, or maybe even round 4. And then are you like burning that pick when you could have helped you for 2023, even though it could help you for 2024? It kind of gets you into this, high variable and high variance situation, but it's a possibility. It is a possibility. Oh, Ralph says, what about Edwards' concussions? He missed the last 13 games with 2 of them. Concussion history for him as well. There's injury concerns, abound for this offensive line, in addition to some development questions. So it's a fair point all around. We're going to move to the defensive side of the ball now here on Disguise Coverage. Before we do that, I'm going to plug the sponsor. Like I mentioned them earlier, One Pie Pizza, the best pizza in Buffalo, New York. Delicious sweet sauce pie, cup and char pepperoni, homemade blue cheese, the initiatives that they do for the community, the Alzheimer's Foundation, the SPCA, Toys for Tots, parting with Roswell to knock out cancer. They're just good people making great food. Do yourself a favor. Check the online menu here in the episode show notes, whether here on YouTube or any one of the podcasting apps or platforms that you listen to this show on. Click on that link, go to the online menu, treat yourself to some one pie pizza, and also potentially do some good for the community while you're at it. Mention Disguise coverage while you're there, and maybe you'll get a little treat and a bonus and a benefit. Now, as I mentioned, let's kick to the defensive side of the ball here. Oh, actually, let me get this from Melcher. It says, Anthony, what do you think about drafting Carter Warren in the mid rounds? He's older and isn't a good run blocker, but he's really good in pass protection. I've watched some of his tape. Big dude, long, injured this past year, I believe. So not a ton of tape. He's somebody who initially I thought could be had in like the rounds 4 and 5-ish type area. Now he's starting to creep up. He's somebody who I like. I like Nick Saldiveri more from Old Dominion, but I think Warren is in that tier of tackles on early day 3 that I think would fit. You see what he can do. I think he's a dude who competes with Spencer Brown potentially, or just adds tackle depth in general. That's a very fair point. Now we move on to the edge grouping. This is what I've talked about a lot this offseason. The edge grouping right now as it stands: Von Miller, Gregory Rousseau, AJ Epinesa, Boogie Basham, Kingsley Jonathan, Kendall Vickers, and Shaq Lawson. We've talked a lot on this show about the lack of pop off the edge once Von Miller went down. My biggest question here is twofold. Who steps up or steps in, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, potential free agent or draftee, as the edge number 2 if Von Miller misses time, and or who steps up or steps in as edge number 3 when Von Miller returns. Wanted to bring up some numbers here just to kind of reiterate some things and refresh some things for you folks. So defensive line pass rush productivity, a formula that combines sacks, hits, and hurries relative to how many times they rush the passer. Weeks 1 through 11 out of 240 qualifying defensive linemen. This is weeks 1 through 11. I'm just going to do weeks 1 through 11 and weeks 12 through 18. So weeks 1 through 11, there was 240 qualifying defensive linemen. Weeks 12 through 18, there were 213. And this is their pass rush productivity for the Bills individually in those two different groupings, 1 through 11 versus 12 through 18. Greg Rousseau, he was 8th in pass rush productivity, weeks 1 through 11. Weeks 12 through 18, he was 22nd. AJ Epinesa was 41st in pass rush productivity in weeks 1 through 11. Weeks 12 through 18, he was 29th. He stepped his game up. Jordan Phillips was 22nd in pass rush productivity weeks 1 through 11. He was tied for 122nd in weeks 12 through 18. Shaq Lawson was tied for 52nd in pass rush productivity in weeks 1 through 11. He was 122nd in weeks 12 through 18, tied with Jordan Phillips. Ed Oliver did not qualify in weeks 1 through 11 because he missed some time. But weeks 12 through 18, out of those 213 qualifying defensive linemen, he was tied for 140th in pass rush productivity. Boogie Basham, he was 60th out of 240 in pass rush productivity weeks 1 through 11. Weeks 12 through 18, he was 140th out of 213. Tim Settle, bad all around. Weeks 1 through 11, 210th out of 240 qualifying defensive linemen in pass rush productivity. Weeks 12 through 18, 192nd. For those who don't know, week 11 is when Von Miller went down. So I broke it up, weeks 1 through 11 versus 12 through 18. He had a huge impact on the defense as a whole, on the defensive line as a whole. So you've got the individual performances there in 2023 and how that's affected if Von Miller misses time, which I do think he does. I know he was at OTAs today, working out, running around, wearing a brace, but I do think he misses time to start this year. I'm continuing to say it. I think a solid timetable for his return is middle of October to middle or end of November. Similar to what we saw with Trey White, Von is into his early mid 30s. This is the second time he's torn that ACL. I don't think it's necessarily just a given that he'll be back to start the year. I think you want to take it slow. You want him for December and January more than you do for September, October, November. You need the closer for the playoffs, not for the start of the season as much as I would like him. But you've got those questions for 2023 if or when he misses time. And then the other questions that you have is the future of this group in 2024 and beyond, because the only edge rushers you have under contract in 2024 are Von Miller, Gregory Rousseau, and Boogie Basham. So if you're looking at 2023, can this group, other than Von Miller, make an impact on the edge? I think Rousseau had a better year than he gets credit for, especially considering he was playing with that banged up ankle as the season went on. We know what he can do from a edge setting standpoint and a run defense standpoint, but I think he got a little bit better as a pass rusher this year as well. AJ Epinesa, like I mentioned, had a very strong end to the year, weeks 12 through 18, once Von Miller went down. 213 qualifying defensive linemen. He was 29th in pass rush productivity. He was only 7 spots behind Groot, and he jumped up from 41st in weeks 1 through 11 to 29th in weeks 12 through 18. That's really good. I think he started to fix up some of his missed tackling issues. He was playing the run better. Can he clean that up enough to be a consistent number 2 to Greg Rousseau if Von is out, or be a consistent number 3 if Von is good and is the number 1? So can this group, other than Von, make an impact on the edge? And if it's in 2023, who is it? Is it by committee? Is it a rotation of Epinesa and Shaq? And do you get something out of Boogie Basham finally? Or is it one person holistically owning it? Does Basham take a jump? Does AJ Epinesa take a jump? I don't think you're going to see that from Shaq Lawson. I think at this point he is who he is. And then based off what happens in 2023, what does that look like for 2024? If Epinesa steps his game up this year, does he get a deal and does he stay? Do they draft an edge this year? Do they dip into free agency and sign Leonard Floyd, which I would love? I think this is a position group that, unfortunately, as I've said on the show, despite the investment that they've sunk into this group in free agency and the draft, I think this is a group that, unfortunately, has a lot of question marks and still isn't necessarily being talked about as a group that has a lot of question marks. Chris says, Ant, you aiming for 3 hours tonight or what? Great show, man. I appreciate the kind words. No, this is regular. We usually go about an hour and 30 to an hour 45 here on the Skies coverage, depending on what's going on in the chat. But fair point, fair point. Ooh, Roy says, soon to be Pro Bowler, AJ Epinesa. Oof. Very interesting, very interesting, very interesting. I don't like the idea of having to invest in edge again, but I don't rule it out of the realm of possibility of them going edge in round 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 at any point in this draft. I really like a lot of the edges at the top part of this draft. Like we talked about on last week's episode, this edge class is really deep. I would love for them to go edge on day 1 or day 2. We'll see how the board falls. I don't think it's the biggest need. I do think it is a bigger need that it is getting credit for. And again, I think there's significant questions like, what are you getting from this grouping in 2023 if Von Miller is out? And even when Von Miller's back, cool, you have Von and you have Groot. What do you have after them? You know Shaq Lawson is solid against the run. But, I think Bruce Nolan mentioned it several weeks ago when I had him on the show. Or no, it was Joe Marino when I had him on the show. When Von went down, Shaq Lawson became edge number 2. That kind of told you where they thought Epinesa and Boogie Basham were. Now, Epinesa, as I mentioned, played better down the stretch, but the fact that Shaq Lawson became the 2 kind of tells you where they saw that edge grouping hierarchy at that point last year, and it's a very similar group this year. Now, as we move to the other part of the defensive line, the defensive tackle grouping, I've talked about this one a lot all off season. So I don't want to, really drive it home too much here, but you're looking at the defensive tackle grouping now. Daquan Jones, Ed Oliver, Jordan Phillips, Tim Settle, Eli Ankou, Brandon Bryant, Cortez Broughton. Your top 4 right now are Daquan Jones, Ed Oliver, Jordan Phillips, and Tim Settle. Tim Settle, like I mentioned earlier, had some of the worst advanced metrics on the entire year, both with Von and without Von Miller. I know he was banged up as the season went on, but he disappeared a little bit on tape. He's your defensive tackle 3 or defensive tackle 4, depending on how you view Jordan Phillips. And then Jordan Phillips is your defensive tackle 3 or your defensive tackle 4. That means 2 of your top 4 guys are Tim Settle and Jordan Phillips. And Settle, like I mentioned, disappeared a bit from a metric standpoint and a film standpoint. Maybe some of that or a majority of that was due to the injury. We'll see. Jordan Phillips is unreliable as a consistent guy to plug into this lineup just because of the injury history. When healthy, he's very effective, especially in this scheme, especially on this team and in this system. The issue is he can't stay healthy. Yeah, I'm not even necessarily talking about the shoulder injury that he suffered at the end of the year last year. Think about the hamstring injury when he pulled up lame against the Tennessee Titans. Like, he keeps getting these soft muscle injuries that date back to his time in Arizona, which is why he didn't really work out there. So you've got a top 4 right now where your number 3 and number 4 defensive tackle are not necessarily ideal. Ed Oliver is your 2 or your 1, depending on how you're looking at it. He disappears in stretches. Daquan Jones is fantastic, but he doesn't give you a ton of pass rush pop, which I don't think he should need to given what else you have. Then you add in the fact that there is literally no defensive tackle that is under contract in 2024. That goes back to a comment made earlier here in the show and a question that I said I would get to when we got to defensive tackles. You have no defensive tackles under contract in 2024. You do have Daquan Jones and Tim Settle with void years, but you physically do not have anyone over contract or under contract. The biggest question for this grouping right now in this roster reset here is the strength of the top four and the future. Again, Tim Settle, awful advanced metrics, disappeared as the season went on. Granted, he did have the injury. Jordan Phillips, when healthy, fantastic. Problem is, he's not really healthy often, and he suffers injuries that prevent him from even functioning at like 70 or 80%, or don't even allow him to get into the lineup. I don't think Jordan Phillips can be counted on for a full season as a top four defensive tackle. And right now, he might be your defensive tackle 3 ahead of Tim Settle. You have no one under contract for 2024. Defensive line is crucial to the Buffalo Bills team building philosophy. They build from the defensive line out, as stated by Brandon Beane and as co-signed by Sean McDermott. You need more from this position group in 2023, and you legitimately have no one on the roster for 2024. This is another grouping, much like edge. I think this goes to the comment earlier for whoever asked about Mazi Smith. It's part of the reason I really like Mazi Smith. I think they need more reinforcements on the interior for 2023, and also just some kind of roster stability and semblance of who you got and who you're going to plug in for 2024 and beyond, because you got nobody. This defensive line is important in this scheme and system and philosophy in general, but even more so if you're a defense that is going to play with light boxes and play with nickel personnel like the Buffalo Bills are. You need that defensive line to be stout and solid against the run, to give you some pass rush pop, to not get blown off the line, to be sound structurally and schematically within your gaps, get penetration. Like I talked about it earlier, you need to be strong in that spine of the defense. Defensive tackles, linebackers, safety. You need to be thorough in that area. The Bills are questionable on their interior right now, which is, again, unfortunate. DF Forever says, we need a one-tack defensive tackle now. Ooh, I like this Roy perspective, who said Benton or Ika would be nice. I really like Keanu Benton. I like him more as a fit than Siaki Ika from Baylor. Ika's weird. Like, he's big and burly and thick. And I hear the Vita Vea comp for him, but he does not play like Vita Vea. He's lighter in the feet that he gets credit for, which is cool because he's more athletic. Like, he can pull spin moves and chase guys down when he gets penetration, but it also means he doesn't sit and anchor as well against double teams and isn't necessarily playing to his size and frame. He's more athletic than he gets credit for, which is fun, but he's not as much of a physical dominant holder at the line of scrimmage and point of attack that his weight or size or frame may indicate. But I would welcome him. I would welcome Mazi Smith. I think Keanu Benton is the perfect size plus frame plus scheme fit potential. It's just a big dude who can penetrate, who can stay strong at the point of attack, who's quick. I really like the idea of Keanu Benton in the second round. That's been my ideal round 2 pick all offseason, or at least for the last month or so. Keanu Benton at 59. I think the fit is great. The need is great. I would really like Keanu Benton in that second round. Let's tie that into another position group as we continue on this roster reset here with 3 more position groupings to go. Linebacker. You've got Matt Milano, you've got Terrell Bernard, you've got Babylon Spector, you've got Tyler Matakevich, you've got AJ Klein, who they just brought back. Milano, Spector, and Bernard are all back again in 2023. I'm not going to get cute here in diving into the linebackers. Biggest question, who's replacing Tremaine Edmonds? That's it. Are they already on the roster? Is it going to be a rookie? Is it a timeshare? Is there going to be more 3 safety looks? And the nature of the position is changing in that regard. Like we talked about earlier, are you going to go with a bigger thumper? Are you going to go with AJ Klein on first and second down and then sub him out on third down and run kind of a sub package linebacker spot, maybe with Taylor Rapp as your dime linebacker? Maybe it's Terrell Bernard. Are there more schematic changes Sean McDermott is going to be implementing as the full-time defensive coordinator and play caller? And then you add in how, depending on who the Bills select at linebacker in the draft, if they pick Campbell or Simpson or Drew Sanders, who they select or go with could potentially indicate what they will be doing schematically in 2023. If you go with Drew Sanders or Trenton Simpson, guys who their strong suit right now isn't stacking and shedding in the box, guys who are more versatile and more mobile and you want to keep clean, That ties into the importance of defensive tackle. You need more reinforcements at the defensive tackle spot, like we just talked about in general, but also to keep your young, fast flowing linebackers clean at the second level. We saw the improvement that this Bills defense had as a whole with the addition of Daquan Jones and the improvement in play for Matt Milano, who became an All-Pro, and Tremaine Edmonds, who had a great year and cashed in big time. We saw how their play went up with the addition of Daquan Jones when they had better play in front of them. If it's a young guy or smaller guys, so if it is Terrell Bernard, if it is Trenton Simpson, if it is Drew Sanders, those defensive tackles are even more important, and the line in general, in keeping them clean and not allowing linemen to climb to the second level and get into their chest and get into their frame and prevent them from using their speed and athleticism and fluidity. So depending on what the Bills do here is interesting, because if they stand pat, guess they really believe in Terrell Bernard or AJ Klein or Spector, I suppose, or I guess outside shot at Metakevich, but I don't believe it. That means, okay, if you're staying with the guys that you have in-house, where are you sinking in resources to elsewhere? I would like it to be on that defensive line, especially defensive tackle, because if Terrell Bernard is a guy, cool, he's tremendously undersized. You have to keep him clean. You cannot let guards and centers and tackles climb to the second level to get to Terrell Bernard, because you don't want him having a body linemen like that. You don't want him having to bang against linemen like that and stack and shed and find his way around guys consistently. Like, that's not what he's made for. That's not what he's built for. You don't want Milano living in that world either. So if it's Bernard, you need reinforcements for him. If it's a young guy like Simpson or Sanders, you need and want reinforcements for him. Jack Campbell, you would want reinforcements as well, but he can bang a little more in the box and kind of stack and shed, even though he does have smaller arms, or shorter arms, I should say. But his processing and read and reaction speed and ability to come forward allow him to kind of play ahead at times, which I think helps him in that area. Very fair comment here from Chris saying, I miss Tremaine. Yeah, that's very fair. Roy says, so basically the only starting caliber linebacker we have is Milano. Well, depends on what you view by starting caliber, but right now, of all the other linebackers on the roster, everybody's a question mark besides Matt Milano. You have Matt Milano, who's an All-Pro. That's awesome. If I had to start another linebacker that's on the roster right now, it's probably between Bernard and Klein, and I don't even know where I'd go. If I go Klein, that means I have to go with a dime linebacker on third downs, and I have to do a whole bunch of different options. If I go with Bernard, that means I have to really reinforce the interior, because I don't want dudes getting to him on first and second down, because he's more of a Will than he is a Mike. Oh, a lot of options, and none of them ideal. Corner: Tre'Davious White, Taron Johnson, Kaiir Elam, Dane Jackson, Christian Benford, Cam Lewis, Kyler McMichael, and Jamarcus Ingram. Everyone that I mentioned but Dane Jackson and Cam Lewis are under contract in 2024. The biggest question here, I think there's two. The first one, who is CB2? I want to tie this into some CB2 action from last year. I keep seeing the comment all the time that, like, Bean doesn't, or McDermott doesn't play rookies and should have been playing Kaiir Elam all year, yada, yada, so on and so forth. Dane Jackson, I think, had a better year in 2022 than he gets credit for. I know he had that stretch where he wasn't making plays at the catch point, but that was also happening to a lot of the Bills DBs, not just Dane Jackson. And also some of the coverages that he was getting, blamed for in terms of allowing catches and receptions. It was more of the scheme and the system than it was like guys that were getting open weren't necessarily his responsibility. I think that's where understanding coverages and route concepts come into play. But regardless of all that, Dane Jackson in 2022, there was 136 corners in 2022 that had at least 20% of coverage snaps in the regular season and postseason. Dane Jackson was tied for 11th in pass breakups with 10. He had 10 pass breakups, like I just said. Kaiir Elam had 1, just for reference. Dane Jackson was also, out of those 136 corners, he was tied for the 38th lowest quarterback rating when targeted at 81.9. Kaiir Elam, for reference, was at 83.7. Dane Jackson was also tied for the 37th lowest reception percentage allowed at 58.2%. Kaiir Elam was tied for the 106th lowest at 71.7%. Big gap there. I just think we need to stop acting like it was such a travesty that Dane Jackson saw reps and saw snaps for this team. He's reliable. He's smart. He's not the most athletic. We know he's limited athletically. We know he's limited from a coverage versatility standpoint. But Dane Jackson is not a bad corner. But Now we go into this year thinking who is going to be corner number 2. Also tied into that, I think, is what does Tre'Davious White look like another year removed from that ACL injury? Does he get back to more of pre-ACL injury Tre'Davious White? We started to see that Trey White start to peek his head out a little more each week with literally each passing snap, passing drive, passing week. We saw him get closer to that old Tre'Davious White in 2022. And so does he get back to his old Tre'Davious White self to be corner 1? Then you're looking at corner 2. It's fair to say you wanted Kaiir Elam to get more reps last year to potentially be in a better position for his development here in 2023. That's fine. That's where we are now. Is he corner 2? Is it Dane Jackson? Is it Christian Benford, who showed well last year and who I liked? Is Christian Benford going to move to safety? And again, tied into all of that is what does Tre'Davious White look like another year removed from his ACL? I think the biggest question for this corner grouping, who is corner 2? I think Tre'Davious White gets back to his old self. I think he's corner 1. And again, we're looking at corner 2. Is it a timeshare? Is it matchup specific? We've seen the Bills rotate at corner 2 almost every year under Sean McDermott. And then Levi kind of stabilized that position a little bit. Do they go back away from that rotation? Does Kaiir Elam show well this offseason? Do they want to move Benford to safety? Again, I really like what Benford did last year. I would be okay with him getting a shot at corner 2, but do they want to move him to safety? Is it Elam? Is it Dane? Is it Benford? They've got good depth in the corner room. A minor question in the cornerback position grouping that I think is secondary to the biggest question that I just asked of who is CB2. The second biggest question, or I guess minor question B, who's the backup slot corner? This isn't something that, we're going to dive into too much now, but I want to put on the radar. Taron Johnson is super important in this defense. His ability to cover in man and zone and function as a linebacker with his physicality and his violence and his willingness to come forward. He's very important and integral to what this Bills defense does, especially against teams who run a majority of 11 personnel, which is the majority of teams in the NFL. There's always been a significant drop-off for whoever comes in for him, whether it's Cam Lewis, whether it's Siran Neal. Like, there's never a high floor confidence level, for myself at least, when it comes to someone replacing Taron Johnson. So I think a fair question is, who's the backup nickel? Is it Taylor Rapp now? He saw nickel snaps and reps at times in his tenure with the Rams, especially based on certain matchups, or is he more the dime linebacker guy? I think that's a fair question to ask, and it's one that worries me literally every single week because there is a huge drop-off from Taron Johnson to whoever else they put at slot corner. There's a big difference. I think that question is secondary to the cornerback 2 question, but who is the backup slot? Who's that backup nickel corner? Is a fair question. If I had to lean into someone, I'd probably lean into Taylor Rapp, I think. Like that, but that's not even a given right now. That's what scares me a little bit about this group, and I think that's the biggest question there. Safety, last position grouping here. Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, Taylor Rapp, newly signed, Damar Hamlin, Siran Neal, Zane Anderson, and Jared Maiden. Next year in 2024, they only have Jordan Poyer, Siran Neal, Damar Hamlin, and Zane Anderson under contract in 2024. We know the drill at safety when healthy. Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, arguably, if not the best safety tandem in the entire NFL with what they can do. We know what they mean to this team on the field and off the field, mentally, physically, execution, everything. They're tremendous. Somewhat of a big question here. First with Micah Hyde, what does he look like returning from his neck injury? I think it was encouraging that if the Bills did make the AFC Championship last year, there were rumors that he would have played. I think that's tremendously encouraging. What does he look like having a full offseason to rest, recuperate, recover? Does that injury affect him mentally? Is he a little more wary going into contact? Does he guard himself a little more because it's in the back of his mind or in the forefront of his mind? Or are there any physical ramifications? Can he not play the same way, turn the same way, lean the same way, run the same way? How does that impact him? I think that's a big question to ask. What does Micah Hyde look like returning from injury? But I don't want to say the bigger question, but the more schematic or interesting question, I think, is what does the Taylor Rapp signing mean? And do we see more 3 safety looks? Is he the dime linebacker? Is he the backup nickel, like I mentioned to Taron Johnson? Is he just depth at safety? Is he just insurance and depth for this year and maybe the 2024 starter if Micah Hyde doesn't return? And then you re-up Taylor Rapp for the year. his signing is still a very interesting one for me because I thought he could have gone elsewhere to see more starter-like minutes, and he came here to kind of be safety 3. I don't think safety 4. I think he would be ahead of DeMar Hamlin, even though I know how people like Hamlin. What is Taylor Rapp's future? Like, is he, I see what Chris Kepner from Cover One here, he coined this term whenever you put Taylor Rapp on the field. It's the Raptor package, and I think that's phenomenal. That needs to be a thing. So absolutely shout it with all caps and exclamation point. Justin says Rapp's a chess piece. Yeah, I think he is. Like, I think he can do a lot of things. I like what he can do around the box. Not that he can't cover in too high, looks or split safety looks or cover deep, but I like him more in the box. I like him as a dime linebacker, as that wall defender, that guy who can carry tight ends and who can carry slot receivers or function in the hook curls and the flats. I like him as that dime linebacker or as a slot backup option, potentially to Taron Johnson, just because I don't have faith in Siran Neal or Cam Lewis at that spot. Although I'm probably higher on Cam Lewis at the slot corner than I am Siran Neal. But I think that's a significant question. Do you see more 3 safety looks? Is Rapp coming in tied to some of the schematic changes or philosophical changes this Bills defense might have as they shift to Sean McDermott controlling the reins completely instead of having some of that Leslie Frazier influence as well into this defense? So that's the question there at that safety standpoint. That'll do it for us here on this episode of Disguise Coverage as we start to wind down. Before any folks leave, I know it's late on a, doldrum week in April. Please, 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 and thank you. Drop a like on this video while you were headed out on your way out, whether you're joining me here live. If you were watching later, post live, that's cool too. Please, please, please drop a like on this video before you close or do whatever have you as we start to wind down here on this show. I want to thank everybody for joining me live here on this episode of Disguise Coverage. As I mentioned, I know it's the week before the draft. There's no real news. Everything's kind of slow. I know a lot of people are just kind of sitting and waiting for the draft to roll around next week. So the anticipation and excitement for, action isn't really high this week. So I want to thank everybody who rode with me live here on this episode. It's always awesome to see all the engagement and the live viewers come in and the questions for myself and the questions for one another and the back and forth you folks have with each other. So thank you very much to everyone who rode live with me on this episode. Thank you very much to all the super chats that came in on this episode. I don't remember all the names offhand and I want to, but I'm afraid I'm going to leave one out. But I remember your logos and your icons and the action itself. So thank you very much to everyone who donated for the super chats in this episode. If you did not join me live here on this episode and you're watching this post live, that's cool. I appreciate your post live view. Again, please drop a like on this video. If you are listening to this episode on one of the podcasting apps or platforms, that's cool. Please rate and review on Apple Podcast and or Spotify, whatever you're listening to, or Google platform, whatever have you. Please rate and review. Subscribe to Disguise Coverage on the podcasting apps or platforms. The audio links got screwed up with the brand about a month or so ago, so we're kind of having to redistribute things from the audio side of things. So please subscribe on the audio only platforms if you'd be so kind. And again, if you're here on YouTube live now, post live, whatever have you, please drop a like on this video. Please subscribe to Disguise Coverage. Both of those things going a long way towards helping the channel and myself on this show to track and trend in front of more eyes and ears. It's been a long episode. Next week is draft week. I'm excited. Pumped. Again, thank you to everyone who rode with me live on this episode. I appreciate you folks more than you will know. Myself and Chris Kepner we've been doing the Cover One Sabres and hockey watch party this entire year. Sabres season is done. This Saturday, we're going to be doing one for the Buffalo Bandits, which is pretty cool. Also going to be talking some Buffalo Bills and some draft stuff in intermissions and in commercials and while we watch stuff. It's a great time. It's just an awesome hangout, watching sports and talking nonsense, but also breaking down real stuff. We'll send out the communication on Twitter for that. And if you're in the Cover One Slack channel, you'll see it in the Cover One Slack channel. Join us live Saturday at 8 p.m. for that Bandits watch party. Join myself again live next week, Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern, for the last episode of Disguise Coverage before the NFL draft. And then we'll have NFL draft coverage next week. I'll be hosting the show Tuesday or Friday night for round 2 and 3. I will be on the panel for night 1 on Thursday. Very, 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 very busy week next week. I appreciate you folks more than you know. Drop a like on this video. Please rate and review and subscribe. Tell your family and friends and loved ones about how awesome this show is. Word of mouth is always great. If you thought the show was terrible, that's fine. Tell your enemies. Try and ruin their day with the show. Go get yourself some One Pie Pizza. I hope you and your family and friends and loved ones are all doing well and staying safe. Take care of one another. Be kind to one another. I will see you next week, live Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern, for another episode of Disguise Coverage. That's going to do it for us here on this show. I appreciate you folks. Godspeed. I'll see you next week. And as always, go Bills.